For over 3 decades, a secret has simmered quietly within the walls of Buckingham Palace, until now. Behind the polished image of Britain's most powerful family lies something far more fragile, a truth wrapped in silence, grief, and betrayal. Prince William, a man who has spent his life walking in the shadow of royal duty, recently uncovered something that not only shattered his understanding of the past, but threatened the very foundation of the institution he was born to protect. How do you move forward when everything you believed about your own mother's legacy turns out to be incomplete? And how do you confront a father who chose silence over honesty, even if it meant hiding a dying woman's final wishes from her own children? It started not with a leak or tabloid story, but with a quiet moment of curiosity. At 43, William was combing through the royal archives, a place few outsiders truly understand. There, among hundreds of forgotten documents, dusty folders, and royal correspondences, he found something that changed everything. It wasn't just any letter. It was a handwritten note from a woman named Rosalia, addressed directly to King Charles. It spoke of a decision, a demand really to keep something hidden. That something turned out to be Princess Diana's final wishes. Her private diaries. Her voice, recorded on old cassette tapes. Words never meant for public consumption, but meant, undeniably, for her sons. The contents were devastating. They weren't grand political statements or scandalous accusations. They were her thoughts, raw, vulnerable, and painfully honest. Diana spoke openly about her loneliness inside the palace walls, her crumbling marriage to Charles, and the ever-looming presence of Camilla Parker Bowles. But most of all, her messages carried fear. Fear for her sons. Fear of what the institution might do to them. William, reading and listening in stunned silence, was overwhelmed by emotions he hadn't felt in years: grief, confusion, and a rage he didn't know he was capable of. These weren't just reflections from a broken heart. Diana's words painted a picture of life inside the palace that William had never fully seen. She spoke of betrayal, of being isolated while struggling to protect her children from public chaos and private indifference. She apologized for not being able to give them a more stable world. She warned them of what could come, of being swallowed by an institution more concerned with image than truth. These were not the scripted, royal-approved messages the public had known. They were real, and they were heartbreaking. The man who chose to bury all of this wasn't a distant courtier or a manipulative advisor. It was King Charles himself. His reasons, at least on the surface, were paternal. He claimed he wanted to protect William and Harry from unnecessary pain, that they didn't need to carry the burden of their mother's heartbreak during the most vulnerable years of their lives. But to William, it felt like something entirely different. It felt like control. Like the final, most intimate piece of his mother had been stolen from him, not by fate, but by choice. The confrontation that followed was not public, but it was seismic. William approached his father not as a prince, but as a son, with questions that had waited far too long for answers. The tension between them was palpable. William wanted to know why. Why had his mother's words been locked away? Why hadn't he been trusted with the truth? Charles, facing the pain he had helped prolong, admitted to his decision. He said he was afraid. Afraid of what Diana's words might do to the already fragile image of the monarchy. Afraid that people would turn against him even more than they already had. But none of it justified the silence. Not to William. The damage had already been done, not just to the public perception of the royals, but to his son's ability to grieve properly. In that moment, something shifted inside William. He had always been the steady one, the quiet heir, the dutiful son, the future king. But now, he found himself questioning the very foundation he had vowed to uphold. He wasn't rebelling against the monarchy. He was simply refusing to be complicit in its silence. The tapes and diaries weren't political weapons. They were a mother's final gift to her sons. And William could no longer pretend they didn't exist. For weeks after the discovery, William withdrew. He wasn't absent from public life, but his demeanor changed. The warmth in his eyes dimmed. The rehearsed smiles felt strained. Those closest to him noticed the difference. there was a quiet storm brewing beneath his calm exterior. His mind kept circling back to Diana's words, her fear of being erased, her desperation to protect him and Harry from the emotional coldness she endured. As he dug deeper into the archives, more details emerged. Diana had documented not just her pain, but her predictions. She feared Camilla would not just replace her in Charles's life, but in the public's memory as well. Those fears, William realized, had already come true. Since Charles's coronation and Camilla's rise as queen consort, Diana's presence had gradually faded from royal ceremonies, portraits, and public remembrance. It wasn't overt. It was subtle, quiet, but unmistakable. To William, it felt like a second death. Not just the loss of his mother, but the slow erasure of everything she stood for. Her compassion, her boldness, her humanity, replaced by polished tradition and a royal silence that had cost her everything. The palace, upon learning that William had uncovered the tapes and diaries, went into full crisis mode. Emergency meetings were held behind closed doors. Advisors scrambled to control the damage. Some even proposed relocating the archives entirely. But William wasn't backing down. He made it clear he wouldn't let his mother's voice be buried again. And as whispers about the secret began leaking to the public, the pressure intensified. Social media erupted. The hashtag Let Diana Speak trended globally, and for the first time in years, the monarchy wasn't controlling the narrative, the public was. Amid all this, William did something unexpected. He called Harry. It had been months since they had spoken beyond formality. But this wasn't about protocol. It was about their mother. William told Harry about the tapes, about the diaries, about the letter that Rosalia had written to their father. The conversation was brief, but it cracked open a door long thought shut. William wondered aloud if Harry had always known something, if his decision to leave the royal family had been partly shaped by secrets he could never fully explain. For the first time in a long time, they shared something that couldn't be twisted by the press or buried under royal messaging, their mother's truth. Diana had always been brutally honest, and the tapes were no exception. She spoke candidly about Charles and Camilla's affair, how it had left her feeling humiliated, abandoned, and terrified for her children. Her famous words, "There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded," took on new depth when heard through her own voice, filled with quiet sorrow. She feared that Camilla, once accepted, would reshape the monarchy in her image and that her own memory would be slowly dismantled. Those fears echoed through William's mind as he looked around and realized how little of Diana remained in the public life of the palace. Through all of this, Kate Middleton stood by him. Not with grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but with calm, steady support. Insiders say she spent hours with William as he read and listened through his mother's final words, never pressing, just being there. Her loyalty, quiet but unwavering, was a lifeline. Yet even this brought new tension. Kate's growing distance from Camilla became increasingly noticeable, their interactions cool and brief. Within the palace, loyalties were shifting, and old alliances were beginning to fray under the weight of suppressed truths. The secret didn't stay secret for long. As more details leaked, the existence of the tapes, the confrontation between William and Charles, the raw content of Diana's recordings, the public outcry grew louder. People didn't just want to know what Diana had said. They wanted to understand why it had been hidden. Was Charles really trying to protect his sons? Or was he trying to protect himself and Camilla? These weren't just media questions. They were public demands, challenging the palace's long-standing control over its own story. William, once called a mama's boy by critics, now found himself embraced by a public that saw him as a son fighting for his mother's memory. The vulnerability he displayed, the grief he could no longer hide, struck a chord. People saw themselves in his pain, the longing to hear a loved one's voice one more time, the need to make sense of a past filled with unanswered questions. Now, the royal family faces a reckoning unlike any before. This isn't just a scandal. It's a moral crossroads. William stands at the center, balancing his role as future king with his duty as a son. Releasing Diana's words could trigger more chaos, more media frenzy, more institutional embarrassment. But keeping them hidden would be a betrayal of everything Diana tried to say. Sources suggest William is considering a compromise, sharing parts of the diaries with Harry first as a step toward healing before deciding on a public release. But even that comes with risks. Not everyone in the royal family agrees. Some elders cling to the old ways, silence, tradition, control. But William knows the world has changed. And silence, in today's world, often looks a lot like guilt. This isn't about revenge. It's about truth. About giving voice to someone who is silenced in life and nearly erased in death. William's struggle is not just about family. It's about history, about legacy, about breaking the cycle of silence that has hurt not just Diana, but everyone who loved her. The boy who walked behind his mother's coffin is now a man fighting to preserve her voice, not just for himself, but for his children, and for a country that never stopped loving her. If this story moved you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue to bring you deeper stories that matter. Thank you for watching.